I am Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. This video is directed primarily to the members of the Libertarian Party. It's going to be a long video. I don't know how long, but it's going to be a long one because it's going to outline my political strategy for everybody to see. Totally transparent with respect to this presidential race. But it's going to be done in the context of what's been going on in this party for the last 15 or 20 years or so. Now, many of you know that I announced my candidacy for the 2020 Libertarian Party presidential campaign back in 2019. And as I was going from convention to convention, I was emphasizing to everybody that if you go with the standard Libertarian Party presidential campaign, you're going to inevitably end up garnering the standard 1 to 3% that Libertarian presidential candidates garner. And I said that if you want something different, like 7 to 10%, you've got to go with something different, something bold. But the problem is that the campaign structure within the Libertarian Party doesn't lend itself to really painting a good picture of what I had in mind with respect to bold and different. Most of the state conventions, state nominated conventions, if not all of them, was characterized by a debate. I mean, it was just debate. And the debate format doesn't lend itself to this as compared to, say, a 25-minute talk that I think would be much more constructive in letting the candidates know what kind of campaign they would run if they were the nominee. For example, in a debate, it says, Jacob, you have 3 minutes for an opening statement, and then you spend the rest of the time answering questions by the moderator on topics he wants to ask about, like where do you stand on anarchy or where do you stand on term limits or whatever. And then, Jacob, you have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Well, that doesn't lend itself to painting this picture of what I mean by bold and different. So this time I ended up announcing early. Now, the last time, as y'all know, I got beat by Jo Jorgensen. She beat me fair and square there at the National Convention. No stop the steal for me. And Jo ends up getting 1.1%, which falls within this standard 1 to 3% that I said. Now, let me digress here for a minute because there is kind of an amusing aspect of this. When I was running, there was a faction within the party that, a large faction, not just a small faction, that was saying, if Jacob's the nominee, this is going to be a disaster. Okay. Now, it wasn't that my principles were anti-libertarian. It was because they were libertarian, that they were saying it'll be a disaster. And they were increasingly concerned about this possibility because I was winning primaries. And I was intent on winning these primaries because I wanted the party members to see that a principled message on liberty could garner votes, could win elections. And so I won 7 out of the 9 pre-nomination presidential primaries. So there was increasing concern that I might win this nomination. Now, why would that concern be there? Well, because if I'm the nominee, I'm going to undo the efforts that this faction, which I call the reform-oriented faction, has accomplished over the last 15 or 20 years. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. If you go to my website today, jacobforliberty.com, on the home page, in the position page, you will see, I guarantee you will see a libertarian campaign the likes of which you have never seen in your lifetime. It's totally different from any other libertarian presidential campaign probably maybe in history, but at least in your lifetime. For example, the first banner right at the top, open the borders. Abolish the border patrol, the immigration service, all restrictions on the free movement of goods, services, and people across borders. Make it just like domestic borders. Second banner, abolish Social Security immediately, without hesitation. No opt-outs, phase-outs, buying China annuities by selling Yellowstone National Park. Just get rid of the socialist program and rely totally on family values and voluntary charity rather than the coercive apparatus of the IRS and the bureaucraties of the Social Security Administration. Medicare, ditch it immediately. No health savings accounts, Obamacare, or other socialist reforms. Reject school vouchers, which are just another socialist vehicle to make public schooling work, separate school and state. Legalize all drugs, not just marijuana, fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and so forth. Not only that, but you'll notice on my position page, I do something completely different that no Libertarian Party presidential candidate has ever done. If you look at, for example, the Republicans and the Democrats, their presidential races, they go to focus groups and surveys and polls, and they figure out what are the 2 or 3 most popular positions that are likely to garner the most votes. And so, they pick those, and then they don't mention the others. Like don't mention Social Security, or you can see right now Biden and Trump and DeSantis are all fighting over who's going to secure for Social Security the best. Okay, so you don't want to tackle any of those in a presidential race. Well, to a large extent, that model has been followed in the Libertarian Party presidential races. Don't mention Social Security. No. A third rail, Jacob, third rail. We learned that from the Republican Party. Stay quiet on it, or come up with a plan to save Social Security or privatize Social Security and so forth. On my website, I take a position on every burning issue of our time. I think it's 23 issues, and both in written form and video form. I want everyone to know exactly where I stand on every burning issue of our day from a libertarian standpoint. Now, this is essentially what I was doing in 2020, and this is what caused so much anxiety among this large sector of the party that saw this as like, oh my gosh, this is going to be very, very bad for all of our efforts that we've put into this for the last 15 or 20 years. In fact, they were saying, and this is kind of a funny part too, they were saying, if Jacob's the nominee, he's going to take us back to 1%. You see, their assumption was that the base of national vote totals was 3%, because that's what Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, both Republican governors or former Republican governors who had come into the party, called themselves libertarians, took their Republican-oriented packages, put them in a box, labeled libertarian candidate, libertarian positions, and sold them to the American people as libertarian. And that became sort of the standard, this package of reform-oriented, Republican-oriented picture as libertarian. And so everybody assumed, well, now we're at 3%. That's our base. Jacob's going to take us back to 1% if we run this, pure libertarian campaign. And that would be a disaster, this suggestion was. So what was amusing about this is that Joe ends up getting 1.1%, which is pretty close to 1%. And then the faction takes a totally different approach. This is the second greatest achievement in LP history. This is a monumental achievement. My gosh, this is fantastic, which was considered a disaster if it had happened to me. So I find that kind of amusing. But let me give you a real life example from the 2020 campaign of this anxiety that was going on. Judge Jim Gray. Now, Jim's a friend of mine. We're not close friends, but we're friends. We've known each other for many, many years. I've appeared on his show on his invitation on the internet. We've spoken at conventions together. I just saw him out in Reno at the last national convention. We had a nice visit. I have the utmost respect for him. He has the utmost respect for me, I think. I'm pretty sure he does. And we just are on totally different perspectives on libertarianism, which is in the Libertarian Party, which is why he jumped in the race against me. Pretty much at the last minute, like a month and a half or a couple months or so before the convention. I mean, if he liked my perspectives, he would have endorsed me. Instead, he actually takes the time and the effort and the energy to jump into the race as a presidential candidate because he was so concerned that I might win this nomination. Now, why would he be so concerned? Well, during one of the debates that he missed most of the debates, but one of the debates he was participating in, I asked him a question during the debate, because we were entitled to do that in some of the debates. I said, Jim, in looking at all your positions on your website, how do they differ from the standard Republican presidential candidate? And he says, oh, Jacob, that's an easy question to answer. And he had 1.5 minutes. He talked for the whole 1.5 minutes. He never answered the question. And the reason he never answered was because if he'd answered, he'd have to say there's no difference at all. And there wasn't. I mean, okay, minor variations here and there, but by and large, his package of positions was Republican reform oriented. And so you can imagine why he would feel anxiety over the possibility that I might win the nomination, because all of a sudden I'm the figure for the Libertarian Party. I'm the presidential nominee, a presidential candidate that's saying, here is what libertarianism is really all about. I would be undoing all the work that this reform-oriented wing of the party had been accomplishing for 15 to 20 years. I would be saying, we libertarians don't stand for school vouchers or health savings accounts or Social Security privatization. We believe in liberty, which is the dismantling of all infringements on liberty. But this phenomenon is not new. When I first joined the party in 1990, and let me explain to you how that happened. That I get a phone call in 1990 from a California activist, LP activist named Bill Evers, asking me to join the platform committee. And I said no. And he says, why not? And I said, because I didn't know much about the party. I'd been involved with the think tank world, the educational foundation world. And I said, it's not for me, because you guys you're a political party. You're watering down principles to get votes. And that doesn't interest me. And he says, well, have you ever read the platform? And I said, no. And this is what I really said to him. I said, I don't need to read it. I know it's a collection of hodgepodge public policy prescriptions that water down, compromise libertarian principles and to get votes. And I'm not interested in that. So he says, well, have you read the platform? And I said, no. And he says, well, let me send it to you. So he sends me the platform, and I'm starting to read this thing, and I'm bowled over. I mean, just stunned. Now, this is the 1990 platform, not the current platform. And this is a pure libertarian manifesto. I'm just shocked. I mean, abolish Social Security, abolish Medicare, abolish the CIA, and which, by the way, is not in the current platform. This group ended up prevailing, and they removed that plan. The CIA is the most evil agency in U.S. history, and there used to be one party whose platform called for the abolition of the CIA, and they uncorked the champagne at some point in there, because at some point along the line, somebody removed that from the LP party platform, unfortunately. But in any event, I served 3 terms, but during those terms, I noticed that there was a growing trend on the platform committee and elsewhere in the party to water down the platform, to get rid of planks like abolish the CIA and so forth, to make it softer in order to appeal to Republican voters. There was this trend toward the Republican Party, toward conservatism. And the idea was that if we water down these principles, or we conceal the principles, compromise the principles, we can draw more votes from the Republican Party. The idea was that libertarian principles are an albatross, they're a liability, and that if we can just get rid of them, conceal them, or whatever, we can get elected. Bill's in my position was, are you kidding me? The platform is our protection against candidates that want to do that. So if the candidate says, for example, he favors the Persian Gulf intervention, we can say, oh no, that's not the party position. Here's our platform. So the platform was our protection. But over time, that faction ended up prevailing. Now, I wasn't active in the party for a long time, and I came back in 2019. And I contacted state conventions. This is long before I had announced. This is the year before I announced. And, I announced in November of 2019. This is the period of time from January to November. And I contacted state conventions, and I said, can I come and give a 10-minute talk at your convention? And they all said yes, except one. One didn't. They later said, we didn't know who you were, and we thought you were some crank that was going to ask you to speak at our convention. So we said no, and they said, we're really sorry about that. And I said, oh, forget it. It was kind of funny. But at the other conventions, I'd give this 10-minute talk, and it was a fascinating experience because I could tell from the looks of people. I would say most of the people in attendance had come into the party in the last 15 or 20 years. And as I was talking, giving this pure principle case, open the borders, abolish Social Security, their eyes were this big. They'd never heard this before. I mean, here's a speaker saying this is libertarianism, and they've got their mindsets. It's inculcated in them that no, no, Jacob, libertarianism is welfare, warfare, state reform. And their eyes were this big, but I could tell I was touching chords. They just couldn't figure out what the heck was going on here. And so we go on, and I ultimately announce in November. Now, I had a funny experience that I announced at the South Carolina Libertarian Party convention in November. And I didn't qualify for the presidential debate there. And so I go to the debate. And there's, 6 candidates or so. And it's being moderated by Matt Welch of Reason Magazine. And Matt's a longtime libertarian activist. He moderates a lot of the debates, and he covers the conventions in Reason Magazine. A great guy. And he, one of the first questions, if not the first question he asks is, where do you stand on Medicare? And all 6 or 7 or whatever it was candidates gave some variation of reform, decentralize or health savings accounts, but all of the answers left in one form or another Medicare intact, which is the standard Libertarian Party presidential campaign position. So I came back to my house and I wrote on my campaign blog, I said, well, I didn't qualify for that debate, but I want everyone to know in the party how I would have answered had I been on that stage. I would have said, repeal Medicare immediately without hesitation. And I explained that we once had the finest healthcare system in history. Medicare and Medicaid destroyed that. It's the cause of the ongoing perpetual healthcare crisis. And that with socialism, you got to just get rid of it. Well, this caused Matt and Reason to go on the attack immediately because they're part of this reform-oriented sector of the Libertarian Party and Libertarian movement. They say Jacob's just trying to show that he's more libertarian than the other candidates, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's not even my intention at all. In fact, it's but it's an attack that's been leveled against those of us that adhere to these principles. Because it's a way to prevent people from focusing in on these principles. We're just arrogant. You see, we're pompously trying to show that we're better than these others. Well, how would you even measure such a thing? Suppose you've got a libertarian that favors the drug war and wants to repeal Social Security. And then you got another libertarian that holds the opposite positions on those 2 issues. Which one's more libertarian? So you see, it's a ridiculous concept. All I was trying to do was to say, this is where I stand on this issue. This is how I would have answered had I been on the debate stage. The way I figure it is, LP members ought to know where every candidate stands. That's why all my positions are there on my website. I want everybody to know where I stand. And that's all I was doing. But more fundamentally, I was also saying that this is what liberty is about. The Libertarian Party is supposed to be about liberty. Now, let me explain that what's going on here is what I call the spectrum concept. That the reform-oriented libertarians, the ones that have packaged up this set of libertarianism and have advanced the party for the last 15 or 20 years, saying to people, this is what libertarianism is really all about, all these reforms, and why they were so concerned about my campaign. It can be described as like a spectrum. That on this end of the spectrum are the pure libertarian principles. And over here are the reform-oriented positions, and then there's everything in between. And so the concept is libertarianism is a big tent. The Libertarian Party is a big tent that encompasses all these positions. I don't see things like that at all. Because if you look at these, the way I measure a position and judge a position is, does it comply with the libertarian non-aggression principle? Now, we all know what that means in the party because we all sign a pledge not to support the initiation of force. That's the libertarian non-aggression principle, that we will not support the initiation of force. If you look at all these reform-oriented positions, school vouchers, for example, they all involve the initiation of force. With vouchers, you've got taxation that's being forcibly taking money from one group of people to give it to another group of people. It's a classic socialist model. And all with the intent of, improving the socialist educational system. Or Social Security phasing out. Let's say you're going to phase out Social Security over the next 40 years, which is the standard position within the Libertarian Party presidential campaigns. And, well, for those 40 years, you've got the initiation of force. Not to mention the fact that you're sending out a message that you're trying to save socialism. So all these reform measures, to me, all violate the libertarian non-aggression principle. That's all that matters. It's not this big tent type of thing. But that's what they've been doing for all these years, 15 or 20 years, packaging this Republican-oriented reform measures and saying, this is what libertarianism's all about. So you can imagine why they were so concerned about me being the nominee. Now, another funny incident of this is that after I wrote that article saying repeal Social Security, repeal Medicare, I got a phone call from one of my supporters, a good supporter. And he was like going bananas. I mean, he was hyped up and he was saying, oh my gosh, what have you done? What have you done? You've got to get that article off. Because he had read Matt Welch's and Reason Magazine's article. People are going to think you're arrogant and pompous and you're just more principled than everyone else. And I explained to him, I said, that's not the point. I'm just trying to show you what I would have said if I'd been up there. I mean, would it have been any different if I'd been on the stage and said repeal? Would I have still been arrogant and pompous and trying to show myself more libertarian? Well, he said, the Libertarian Party will never accept that. The members of the party will just never accept that. They'll only accept health savings accounts and so forth. And I'm like, what? This is the Libertarian Party. And so, of course, I never removed it from my website. But then another funny aspect of this is a couple months later, I'm at a state convention where they've announced a libertarian expert on healthcare as a speaker, 1 hour speaker. And this was right before the debate, one of the incessant debates, And so I thought, well, this will be interesting because clearly if the moderator asks about healthcare, the very next hour, man, I'll be talking about repealing Medicare. And so I sit in on this lecture and the guy gets up and he says, we all know what the libertarian position is on healthcare. It's a separation of healthcare in the state, ditch Medicare, get government out of healthcare entirely. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is music to my ears because that's my position. Separate healthcare in the state. And to me, it's the libertarian position, as he pointed out. And then comes the inevitable but. But he says, we all know voters are not ready for that. So we have to give voters what they're willing to get more votes because we're a political party where our objective is to get votes. And of course, I'm thinking back to when I told Bill Evers, I said, I don't want to join the party because it's all designed to get votes. And so he says, I'm going to spend the next hour making the case, showing you how to make the case for health savings accounts. And I'm thinking, which of course leaves Medicare intact. Socialism intact in healthcare. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh. He's got an hour to show people how to make the case, the principal case for liberty in healthcare. And he doesn't do that. He spends a whole hour showing people how to reform socialism. So in any event, that's what went on in the 2020 race. Now, let me talk about another campaign here, and that is the campaign of Chase Oliver. Now, I don't know Chase very well. We have met a couple of times, and both times including at a recent state convention in North Carolina. And Chase comes across as a totally nice guy, a sincere guy, genuine guy. I have no reason to doubt that that's the way he is. And very passionate and very committed and impressive. And so he's announced that he's running for president also. And so nothing personal. I want to just analyze what we're talking about here from the standpoint of his particular political situation, because I think it's very edifying as to what I'm talking about here. Now, let me digress for a minute. What happens after every Libertarian Party presidential campaign? Inevitably, and this happened with Joe, right after the campaign, Monday morning, the hangover, 1.1%, the standard line. If I had gotten into the debates, everything would have been different. The debates. If, they won't let the libertarians in the debates, but if I had gotten into the debates, I'd be at 5% or 10% because I would have gotten my message out. And I couldn't get my message out. I needed the debates to get my message out. I question that. I think if Joe had gotten in the debates, the result would have been exactly the same, 1.1%. I think this has been an erroneous assumption because why is it necessary for a Libertarian Party presidential candidate to get his message out? That's the first question. This party's been in existence for 50 years, more than 50 years. I mean, the party's had 50 years to get the message out, the libertarian message. And so if it had succeeded in that, you wouldn't need to get a message out. Everybody would already know what the Libertarian Party stood for. But in actuality, for the last 15 or 20 years, the Libertarian Party has gotten its message out. And that the problem is that message is mush. It's just a mush. It's a conservative libertarian mush. That what this reform element within the party has done is they've taken Republican principles, reform principles, and conflate them with libertarian principles. Well, it's like mixing black paint with white paint. If you mix black paint and white paint, you're not going to see any white. You're going to see black or maybe very, very dark gray, but you're not going to see any white. And that's what's happened here. That by conflating these Republican principles with libertarian principles, the libertarian principles have been subsumed. They've been taken over by the Republican-oriented messages or principles, positions, so that nobody really knows what libertarianism except this mush, and it's a right-leaning mush. How many times do we see in the mainstream press describing the Libertarian Party as a right-wing party or a conservative party? Because, or even a subset of the Republican Party. And part of the problem is that it, in large part, the Libertarian Party acts as a subset of the Libertarian Party. There's almost a revolving door between the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party, where Republican candidates come in, they run as libertarians, everybody feels comfortable, the principles are interchangeable, they go back, everything's fine, secure the borders, Social Security privatization, healthcare reform, everybody feels comfortable with this revolving door. But in the process, you've got this mush that's being sold as the libertarian brand. And once that happened, that creates a huge problem as far as I'm concerned, because voters are going to be judging the party based on this mush that is kind of become known as the Libertarian Party. Now, so I don't think it makes any difference whether you're in the debates or not, because the standard Libertarian Party campaign is going to be advancing this particular message that, to me, doesn't lend itself to a debate format. Not when you're on the same page essentially as the Republican candidate. What are you going to debate? I mean, both of you are going to join up and join and fight the Democrat. And here's the other problem: that there is no difference in principle between a Democrat and Republican. That's why their debates are so boring. I never watch their debates, or maybe I do for just entertainment value, but they're boring. And the reason they're boring is because fundamentally they're on the same page. They both want to secure the borders. They both want to save Social Security. They both want to save the welfare state. They want to save the warfare state. Now, are there variations? Of course. But it's one party divided into two wings. Okay? And so it's like the NFL divided into two conferences, but one league. One party, the welfare warfare state party, divided into Democrats and Republicans. And that's why those debates are so boring. Because there's not really debates. It's more like a discussion. And so if you put a libertarian in there whose positions are very much similar, okay, there's going to be variations. To the Republican candidate, what's there to debate? Okay, now if we go back to Chase's candidacy, if Chase were to win the nomination, which is a distinct possibility, I have no doubts that he would end up garnering the standard 1% to 3%. And that on the Monday after, he would be saying, if I'd only gotten to the debates, I would have done much better. And I think that in the Georgia race, he got 2%. I think on a national basis, that would be spread out, and he'd garner the 1% because it would be more diluted. But here's the thing about Chase's race in the U.S. He ran for U.S. Senate just last November in the state of Georgia. And his positions are the same as they are now. Okay, that when you run for U.S. Senate, your principles are exactly the same as when you run for president. Standard Libertarian Party Senate race, standard Libertarian Party presidential candidacy. So here's the thing about Chase's race in Georgia. He got into the debates. Okay, he did it. Now, the Republican Herschel Walker did not appear for the debate, so it was Raphael Warnock against Chase Oliver. So it's the perfect contrast, right? The Libertarian against the Democrat, and give Warnock credit for agreeing to appear with the Libertarian. Perfect opportunity, right? And the whole focus of really the nation, and not just the voters, every voter in Georgia was focused in on this race. But also the whole nation. I mean, Chase was called the most influential libertarian in the nation. And you talk about publicity. I mean, how often do you hear publicity, Jacob, publicity? Well, this was publicity to the max because Chase was getting publicity all across the country because he was determining whether there was going to be a runoff between Warnock and Walker. Well, if there's any libertarian that got his message out, it's Chase Oliver. I mean, he got his message out to every single voter in Georgia. He can't say, if only I'd gotten my message out, because here he is in this statewide debate. So at the end of this process, Chase gets 2%. 2% of the vote. Okay? He's got his message out. He's in the debates. Everybody knows what his message is. 98% of the voters said no. And so there was this runoff. Now, I have no doubts that if Chase is the presidential nominee, the result would be no different than Joe's race because that 2% would be diluted over the whole country. He wouldn't get into the presidential debates. And so it would translate to the standard 1%. Now, what's going on here? Well, people learned what the message was and they rejected the message. Now, it might be said after Joe's race or Chase's race, well, I guess people are just not ready for liberty. They're just not ready for libertarianism. It's the same thing that's said after every presidential race. They're just not ready, which is contrary to what you hear in the other years when you say, people say, I think most Americans are libertarians. They just don't realize it. And yet, after the hangover on the presidential race, it's like, well, I guess they're not libertarians after all. And so, but the notion is that they have rejected libertarianism. But that's an incorrect notion because they haven't rejected libertarianism. They've rejected this set of Republican-oriented reform package that's put in a little box with a little ribbon on top that has a label, libertarian candidates, libertarian positions. So the idea is that if you call it a libertarian position, it's a libertarian position. So, for example, right now, or not too long ago, there was an effort to recruit Republicans to come over and run as libertarians. And the recruiting the idea was as soon as they come over, they're now libertarians. And all the positions they held in the Republican Party are now libertarian positions. And it's all packaged up, put the bow on the box, libertarian candidate, libertarian positions. So the idea that voters have rejected libertarianism in these presidential races or Senate races or whatever is fallacious. If I had been the nominee in 2020 and you look at the positions I take on my website and then they got 1%, then you can say they rejected libertarianism. But by rejecting all these reform packages, Republican-oriented reform packages, that's what they're rejecting. So you can't say they've rejected libertarianism. What they are rejecting is what is being labeled libertarianism for the past 15 or 20 years in the Libertarian Party. Now, let me give you another real-life example of what I'm talking about. Mark Victor. Okay, Mark Victor's from Arizona. Another friend of mine. We go back many, many years. I mean, I know Mark much better than I know Chase. We've been friends for, gosh, 30 years or so. And Mark is an attorney. I have the utmost respect for the work he does as an attorney there in Arizona. He's just done magnificent work as a trial attorney. I'm a former trial attorney, and Mark's had some tremendous success, and especially in areas involving direct infringements on liberty. And we have I think he has respect for my work, but we're on totally different sides on libertarian positions. That he would not support my candidacy because he doesn't agree with my libertarian positions. He's got this set of Republican-oriented reform positions that I disagree with. So those are positions that I could not support. Well, Mark announces for U.S. Senate, just like Chase did last time around, and he's running as a Libertarian Party candidate, and he's running against a Democrat. Oh gosh, I forget what his name was. Well, the Republican was Blake Masters, and the Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly was the Democrat, and so Mark's the Libertarian Party candidate, three-way race, and lo and behold, Mark announces at some point that he's in the debates, just like Chase. But now it's a three-way debate. The Democrat, the Republican, both of them agreed that they're going to let the Libertarian into the debates. So here you have it. Remember, if only I got in the debates, if only I got in the debate, I could get my message out. I can get my message out. And now Mark's in the debates. When I read that, because I was keeping track of Mark's race, because I was intrigued by it, I knew immediately that he was in deep trouble. Deep trouble. He didn't know it. I knew he was in trouble before he knew he was in trouble. Because this is what happens. The debate happens, and as it's proceeding on, you realize that there really isn't any difference in substance between the Democrat and Republican. Variations. But there's virtually no difference between Blake Masters, the Republican, and Mark Victor, the Libertarian. That's how I knew he was in trouble, because by taking this package of Republican reform-oriented measures, policies, and so forth, positions, I knew that there would not be any difference substantively with Blake Masters. And I thought, what's he going to do? That's not a debate. How do you debate against a person when you agree with him? And this dawns on Mark. As he's going through, I think it probably dawned on him during the debate, but it certainly dawned on him after the debate, because almost immediately he signals that he wants to drop out. Now, he didn't say that directly, but he said that if either of the candidates, he put out a public announcement right after the debate saying, if either of the candidates will sit down with him for a 3-hour session and convince him that he should drop out and endorse that candidate, he'll do it. Well, that's a signal right there that he's not interested in going on. And it certainly wasn't a signal to Kelly, because Kelly's a Democrat. There's no way that Mark Victor was ever going to endorse a Democrat. Not because he orients toward the Republican Party with these reform measures. The signal was to Blake Masters that give me a face-saving way out, sit down with me for 3 hours, and I'll end up endorsing you, because he realized at this point after the debate there was no real difference. And so by this time, Masters was losing in the polls. He was desperate for political power. He would do anything, including what I consider was a very demeaning exercise, where he didn't sit down for 3 hours, but he sat down for 20 or 25 minutes, where he subjected himself to a critical cross-examination by trial attorney Mark Victor, where do you stand on this, and where do you stand on this, and where do you stand on this, and the Senate candidate puts up with this. It's fascinating. And so at the end of this exercise of cross-examination, Mark Victor says, I've heard enough. We're on the same page. Now, there's variations. He acknowledged that, because you're never exactly on the same page. But overall, you and I are on the same page. I'm dropping out and I'm endorsing you. And so there you have it. You have this movement in the party for the past 25 or 30 years, advancing this Republican-oriented reform message that got extremely concerned with me, that I might be the nominee, because I'm going to come along and say, that's not what we're about at all. Now, why do I say that this particular message that I'm promoting of a campaign of principle for the party of principle, that's our motto. Remember, the party's even trademarked it. I mean, if another party adopted it, I have no doubts the party hierarchy would sue. You can't violate our motto here, our slogan, the party of principle. But what does that really mean? To me, it means you adhere to principle, not some of the time, not most of the time, but all of the time, which is contrary to all these Republican reform message packages that mark the standard Libertarian Party presidential campaign or the standard Libertarian Party Senate campaign. Now, for 30 years, I've said our principles are our greatest asset. You see, because over here in the reform wing, the idea always was, dating back to 1990, the idea was libertarian principles are an albatross. They're a liability. They're costing us votes. That if we can just conceal some of them or water them down, we'll get more votes. For me, this is our greatest asset that we need to be fighting as libertarians. And in fact, by fighting as libertarians with these principles, that's what can vault us into the 7 and 10% or higher category. And that means targeting not Republicans, because I think that's a losing game. The idea of the Republican-oriented packages, we can get Republican voters to come over and vote for us. That's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Let me give you an example of this phenomenon. Bill Weld. Bill Weld is one of the two Republican governors that came over, became the Libertarian Party presidential and vice presidential candidates in 2016 for the Libertarian Party, along with Gary Johnson. They brought their Republican principles over, put them in a box, ribbon, Libertarian candidate, Libertarian principles. Okay, and after that race, Weld began sending signals that he was going to seek the 2020 Libertarian Party presidential nomination. And the reform wing of the Libertarian Party was grooming him to be the nominee. He was their fair-haired boy. He was their next candidate. And they were in charge, and they had no doubts that they were going to make him the nominee. They were featuring him in interviews. He was on fundraising letters for the Libertarian Party hierarchy. He was at fundraising events, major events. I mean, there was no question but that he was the leading figure to be the Libertarian Party candidate in 2020, the presidential candidate. Well, in the midst of this, there's a column that appears in the Washington Post called, "Can This Man Save Conservatism?" Okay. It was written by George Will, who, as many of you know, is one of the premier conservatives and Republicans in the country. I mean, you could call George Will Mr. Republican or Mr. Conservative. And what he was referring to was Bill Weld. And he was saying that if Weld is made the Libertarian Party presidential nominee, because that's the direction it was going, so here in this syndicated column that goes all across the country, Will was effectively endorsing this with the idea that Weld could save conservatism if he's the Libertarian Party presidential nominee. I'm looking at this and saying, oh my gosh. I mean, if Will were ever to write a column like that about me, I think I'd sue for libel. But not the party hierarchy and not this reform wing. For them, it was a great compliment. Publicity, Jacob, publicity. Yeah, he's going to save conservatism. What's wrong with that? You see, because if your package of libertarianism is over here, all these Republican-oriented packages, and you're striving to get votes from Republicans, man, what greater candidate than to be running a conservative Republican who comes over and now he's a libertarian. He's got his little box with libertarian candidate, libertarian positions. He can save conservatism in the process. That's the mush I'm talking about that has become the Libertarian Party, and that's why a lot of people refer to the Libertarian Party as reform, as a subset of the Republican Party, or right wing, or conservative, and so forth. Well, the idea has been that we're targeting the Republican Party, the Ron Paul voters. That's the idea. That y'all remember the big upsurge in support for Ron within the party in 2008, 2012. And so the idea has been ever since that we're going to get those voters. And that's this Republican package of reform proposals. It's with that goal in mind. But it'll never work. It'll absolutely never work, because Republican voters are never going to cross over in large numbers to vote for the Libertarian. If they would have done this, they would have come over in huge numbers for Gary Johnson, both in 2012 when he ran in 2016, but they didn't. And the reason is the same reason as to what happened with Weld. Weld ended up going back home to the Republican Party. He went through the revolving door back home to run against Trump in the primaries, Republican primaries. All of his fierce supporters, the people that were grooming him for more than a year to be the Libertarian Party candidate, did not follow him. Now, you would think they would. They were so devoted. They wanted to make him the Libertarian Party presidential nominee. Why not follow this man? Help him defeat Trump in the Republican Party? No, because they were too loyal to the party, Libertarian Party. They put the party loyalty above the man they felt should be president or the presidential candidate. They stayed here. In fact, it was even worse than that. They started calling Weld a traitor and a betrayer and so forth. It was really interesting. But the same principle applies to Republicans. They're not going to cross party lines in large numbers to vote for the Libertarian. And that's why the standard Libertarian Party presidential campaign or Senate campaign is doomed. Now, there may be outliers at the Senate level. You might get a 5% or whatever. But the standard is going to be, at the presidential level, is going to be the 1% to 3%. And like I say, I think 3% is the max. That's where you need 2 Republican governors to come in and say, hey, we're libertarians and these are our libertarian positions. Okay, so does that mean that the Libertarian Party is doomed to this 1% to 3% over and over and over again? No. What I'm saying is that if you run my kind of campaign, a libertarian campaign like I've got on my website, we can break into the 7% to 10% or higher range. Now, why is it? Because I don't target Republicans for votes. I go after Republicans. I think Republicans are as equally responsible for the plight in which our country finds itself as Democrats. So instead of trying to placate and endorse Republicans, as some libertarians do, and praise them and so forth, I say no. Hold them responsible for what they've done with the out-of-control spending, the forever wars, the interventionist foreign policy, the giant warfare state, the giant welfare state. They're just as responsible as the Democrats are. Well, then, so how do you get the 7% to 10% votes? You go after the disgruntled people that are outside this Republican Party. 3 groups, for example: blacks, people who don't vote, and Hispanic voters. All 3, to me, are gold mines for getting the Libertarian Party into that 7% to 10% or higher range. Now, I've heard that, oh, Jacob, but no, the party's now targeting black people for votes. It's not enough, because they're targeting them with the standard libertarian message, this reform Republican message. It'll never work. They're never going to vote. Black people are never going to vote for this Republican-esque message. They're only going to vote for this principled message of libertarianism. Now, why do I say that? Well, experience. When I ran for U.S. Senate in Virginia in 2002, I campaigned heavily in the black community. And I ended up getting endorsed by one of the most prominent ministers, black ministers in the country. He was later elected to the African American Hall of Fame. And you can see his letter of endorsement on my website on my biographical page. Now, I went to concerts where black people were. I went to picnics. I interacted with people. And so I spent a lot of time there. Now, this was a 3-way race. John Warner was the Republican, the most popular senator in Virginia history. I think he had been married to the actress Elizabeth Taylor. And there was no Democrat in the race. They didn't want to waste the time against Warner. They knew he was a shoo-in. There was a LaRouche in the race. Now, I ended up with 7% of the vote, over 100,000 votes. Where did those votes come from? Well, I guarantee you they didn't come from any Republicans, because they were all enamored with Warner. And this was right after 9/11, when I was saying that U.S. foreign policy had produced the 9/11 attacks, had motivated those attacks. And that is not what people wanted to hear at that time, especially not Republicans. So I know my votes didn't come from them. There's no way any Democrat's going to wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go vote for the Libertarian as a protest vote against the Republicans, because I was calling for the repeal of Social Security and Medicare and all other socialist programs, just as I am now. So my 100,000 votes had to come predominantly from blacks and to a certain extent Hispanics too, along with libertarians. And then when I was running in the 2020 race, I spent a lot of time in North Carolina because I wanted to win that primary, and I did win that primary. But I was campaigning heavily among blacks, talking about the legalization of drugs, the racist war on drugs. It's the most racist government program since segregation. No, there's no question about it, maybe even more so than segregation. Mass incarceration, cops stopping black people just to humiliate them, ridiculous questioning. If they don't show the proper respect, they get beat up or in the worst case killed. Asset forfeiture, stealing money from blacks on the highway, on and on. And I campaigned heavily. Again, I was at the bus station in Raleigh talking to blacks. I can tell you that they had a better understanding of the crooked and corrupt system under which we live than your average white person, well-to-do white person. And then in Wilmington, a group of libertarians are put together a door-knocking campaign in the poorest neighborhood in Wilmington. They told me that no white person had ever campaigned in this neighborhood. We were the first whites to go in and campaign in this neighborhood, and they were stunned to see this whole group of white people. And we invited the other libertarian presidential candidates. We said, come on, campaign. This will be raising the image of the Libertarian Party of North Carolina among black people in the North Carolina. Nobody showed up. No other presidential candidate. A vice presidential candidate showed up, Spike Cohen, to his credit, and he'll tell you that it was a phenomenal reaction. I mean, as word spread that we were in this neighborhood, and my flyers were talking about this racist war on drugs, I had a guy come up to me and say, Mr. Hornberger, I heard you're in the neighborhood. I'm going to vote for you, and I'm going to get all my friends to vote for you. Another guy says, Mr. Hornberger, would you please come over to this house? This man wants to meet you, and he's disabled. He can't get out. And I said, sure. And that was the reaction we were getting. It was incredible. And I have no doubt that that helped me win that primary. So that's what we ought to do. But it's not just enough to target blacks in general with this Republican-oriented message. Not going to work. Okay. Second, people who don't vote. There's a reason why they don't vote. That's like sometimes 50%. Because they know the whole system is crooked and corrupt. But as long as you have this Republican-oriented standard Libertarian Party presidential campaign, they're going to consider you just part of the system. But if you have a system that's saying, let's dismantle this whole thing, now you're going to get their attention. And that's a gold mine for votes. And then there's the Hispanic vote. 30 years ago, I was saying we ought to be targeting Hispanics, and the party hierarchy yawns. Well, today, one of the political phenomena of our time is that Hispanics in large numbers have moved to the Republican Party. You can Google that online. There's a major Hispanic radio station operating out of Miami that is all conservative. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we missed the boat here. Because Hispanics, I would argue that most of them right now do not favor open borders, okay? They take the standard position. But that's because they've never heard the case for open borders. They've got to feel sympathy for all these families that are losing loved ones, drowning in the Rio Grande, or dying in the of thirst in the American Southwest, or dying in the backs of 18-wheelers, and all this, humiliation and stuff, and deportations and incarcerations. That if all of a sudden they understand that there's a viable, realistic solution to all this, open borders, which is our heritage. We had open immigration for more than 100 years. It's a philosophy that's consistent. We're the only libertarian party that offers hope to the downtrodden of this world. And I think that that's another gold mine of potential votes. And that's what I'm saying is I'm not just saying some Pollyannish innocent thing of, I'm going to get 7 to 10%. I'm saying there's a real viable reason why I hold that we can break out into those higher numbers by running a campaign of principle for the party of principle. So 14 months from now, you all will know exactly where I stand, what kind of candidacy I will do. And I'm fighting for your nomination again. You can beware of that, because I'm going to fight hard for it again. At the end of this thing, if the majority once again says, Jacob, no, we want to go with the safe route, we want to get our 1 to 3%. That's fine, I've lost elections before. Life goes on. But if you want to do better, if you want to fight as a libertarian, and that's what I'm saying, we need to fight as libertarians, even if we do go back to 0.5%. There's some consolation of going down as a libertarian, because that's who we are. We are libertarians. We're not Republican lights. We're not Democrat lights. We are libertarians, and I say we need to fight as libertarians, and our principles are our weapons. These are our shields and our swords as we go into battle, and we need to use those shields and swords. Those are our weapons, and I say that if you want to do well in this party, you got to take a risk. You got to do something bold. Life rewards the bold, and sure, it's a high risk thing to run a campaign different than any campaign that's ever been run, a campaign of principle. But I say it's a risk worth taking. That's what will vault us into the 7 to 10% category or even higher. And so if you're interested in taking that route, then I ask you to join up with me and support me this time around in my effort to become the nominee of this party. I have long believed that it is the destiny of the Libertarian Party to lead this country out of the status morass into which both Republicans and Democrats have plunged our nation. And that we need to do that with our principles, a campaign of principle for the party of principle. And if we do that, I have no doubts, we will lead this country and indirectly the world to the highest reaches of freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony that mankind has ever seen. Thank you very much.